How's it going, everyone? With the new prestige changes coming to how you unlock perks in Dead by Daylight, it's going to be more important than ever to level up your characters in the best possible order. For example, getting Trapper to prestige 1 will instantly unlock the tier 1 version of all 3 of his perks on every other killer. As soon as you prestige, you can go to literally any other killer and use those perks without spending a single additional blood point. You can then find the tier 2 and 3 versions on other killers by finding them in the blood web as normal. It's somewhat similar to how teachable perks work right now. Additionally, if you were to get Trapper to prestige 3, the tier 3 version of all of his perks would be immediately unlocked on every other killer, including future killers that haven't even come out yet. Prestiging is now forced once hitting level 50, and you no longer lose any perks, add-ons, or offerings for doing so. Now, this list is for the killer role in general, so if you plan on maining a specific killer like Huntress, for example, and you just want the best perks for her, then this list is not going to give you the best advice. This list has 3 primary factors. The first is bang for your buck, so how many strong perks are you getting from a single character? The second is how strong or necessary those perks are for winning the game. And the third is how well the perks are going to synergize with other perks you've already unlocked. Some perks are useless by themselves, but incredibly powerful when comboed with another perk. The very first killer on the list is Pinhead, or the Cenobite. He'll give you Deadlock, which is one of the strongest perks in the game, especially if you're a newer player, but even way later on into the game, it's still one of the best meta perks. After a generator is repaired, the entity blocks the generator with the most progress for 30 seconds. You see its white aura during this time, so this is going to slow survivors down on generators quite significantly. Moreover, we have Hex Plaything. The first time you hook a survivor, they become cursed, and Hex Plaything activates on Adult Totem. The cursed survivor suffers from the Oblivious status effect until Hex Plaything is cleansed. Hex Plaything's totem aura is revealed to the cursed survivor when within 16 meters of it. For the first 90 seconds, only the cursed survivor can cleanse the totem. So this is a great Hex perk, especially if you don't have any other Hex perks, and it also is going to give each individual survivor you hook a completely unique objective to them for at least 90 seconds. So this is going to slow the game down quite significantly, and the Oblivious status effect makes it to where they cannot hear your terror radius, so you're basically completely stealth while this Hex totem is active for each specific survivor. Lastly, we have Scorch Hook, Gift of Pain. At the start of a trial, up to 4 random hooks are changed into Scorch Hooks. You see their auras in white. When a survivor is unhooked from a Scorch Hook, they suffer from the Hemorrhage and Mangled status effects until fully healed. Hemorrhage is going to make it to where they are bleeding a lot more, and if you interrupt their heal, their healing progress is going to drain, and Mangled makes it to where the next time they get healed, it's going to take at least a few extra seconds for them to get that heal off. The first time a survivor is healed, they suffer from a 9% penalty to healing and repairing actions until injured again, and after the next update, this perk is getting buffed to where it'll be a 16% penalty after they heal, so it's going to be significantly stronger. If you pair this with a base kit perk like Monstrous Shrine, for instance, you already have a great meta build right out of the gate, and as far as the killer itself goes, Pinhead is labeled as a hard killer to learn, but I think he actually has quite a few good fundamentals for learning the game, so I wouldn't say he's a bad killer to start with. He has a nice passive slowdown, passive information, and you're going to learn how to anti-loop with this killer. Up next, we have Plague, and Plague basically has one really strong perk, and that is Corrupt Intervention. The reason that this perk is so strong is that without it, you might lose games you otherwise would have won. It's really something that the devs should have probably considered making base kit, because survivors spawn on generators in this game, so without Corrupt Intervention, you could potentially lose 1 or 2 gens, even 3 generators, just because you didn't run this perk. It's extremely required, and that's why it's here. Even though Plague's other perks aren't that strong by themselves, Corrupt Intervention alone is so needed that she takes the number 2 spot on the list and almost took the number 1 spot, to be honest. Beyond that, the perk synergizes very well with the last 3 perks you unlocked from Pinhead. Her second perk is Infectious Fright, so when you put a survivor in the dying state, anyone within your terror radius will scream and reveal their location to you for 6 seconds. It's a strong perk for slugging, but as a newer player, it's not really going to be that needed. Dark Devotion is an okay perk for Legion. Beyond that, it's very memey. When you hit the Obsession, you'll transfer your terror radius to the Obsession for the next 30 seconds, which will basically make you a stealth killer during that time. In the number 3 spot, we have the Artist. Now, the Artist comes with 2 extremely strong perks. You see the aura of destroyed totems. You can perform a ritual on the destroyed totem to rekindle it as a Hex totem for Hex Pentimento. For each Hex totem active at the same time, Hex Pentimento gains an additional effect. And the only effect you're really going to be concerned with while running this perk is its very first effect when you only have 1 active Hex totem, which is that it decreases the survivor's repair speed by 30%. If you could manage to get additional stacks, that's great, but realistically 1 stack is all you need. This perk is going to synergize incredibly well with Hex Plaything. I think Hex Pentimento is probably going to become a huge meta perk when some of the other more commonly used gen defense perks are nerfed heavily in this next update. She also has the best Scourge hook in the entire game, Pain Resonance. Anytime a survivor is hooked on a Scourge hook, the generator with the most progress explodes, instantly losing 15% progress and starts regressing. Survivors repairing the generator will scream, revealing their location. That part will be removed. This perk is getting a slight nerf, but overall I still believe it's the strongest Scourge hook in the game. Even by itself right now, it's going to be way more useful than something like Pop Goes the Weasel. Our last perk is Grim Embrace, which it's not a bad perk, but there's almost always a better option to run over Grim Embrace. It's not that good. Each time a survivor is hooked for the first time, you gain a token. Upon reaching 4 tokens, Grim Embrace activates, and the entity will block all the generators for 40 seconds. Just having Deadlock will already basically give you significantly more value than Grim Embrace ever would. Like I said, there's almost always something better to use than Grim Embrace. It's why it has one of the lowest pick rates of any perk in the entire game. In the 4th slot, we have Trickster. Now, he has 3 really good perks as well. His first and most important perk is No Way Out. After hooking a survivor for the first time, No Way Out gains a token. Once the exit gates have been powered, No Way Out activates. When a survivor interacts with an exit gate switch, you receive a loud noise notification. The entity then blocks both exit gate switches for 12 seconds, plus an additional 12 seconds for each token in your possession. This perk is going to give you extreme value. As far as endgame perks go, this is one of the best, if not the best, endgame perk in the entire game, and it's skill based, so it's a healthy perk to get into your rotation. This perk alone can turn maybe a 1 kill game into a 3k or even a 4k. Can't recommend it enough. His second perk is Starstruck. While carrying a survivor, any other survivors within your terror radius suffer from the exposed status effect. The effect persists for 30 seconds on survivors who leave your terror radius, as well as those within the terror radius when you hook or release the carried survivor. Starstruck has a short cooldown of 1 minute. This perk is extremely useful in a lot of different ways. One, it basically turns any killer into a very lethal killer, because they can instantly down you if you have the exposed status effect. Beyond that, it shuts down any body blocking while carrying a survivor. They just can't do it because they'll go down and potentially throw the entire game. So it's already the most needed perk to stop body blocking. Anything like Mad Grit is fun, but this just shuts it down completely. Lastly, he has Hex Crowd Control, and since you don't have Bamboozle yet, this is going to be extremely useful for survivors who are abusing really strong windows that you really can't do anything about. The entity blocks the window for 20 seconds after a survivor performs a rush to vault through it. Unfortunately, it is a Hex perk, so it is going to get shut down at some point during the match, but until you have Bamboozle unlocked, I think this is a really good secondary option. Coming in at number 5, we have Doctor. Now, Doctor wouldn't normally be this high on the list, but because of the buff coming to Overcharge, it might be really important to get this killer in your rotation very early on. Overcharge a generator by performing the damage generator action, so after kicking a gen. The next survivor interacting with that generator is faced with a tremendously difficult skill check. Failing the skill check results in an additional 5% loss of progress. Succeeding the skill check grants no progress but prevents the generator explosion. Overcharge will also cause a kicked generator's regression speed to grow from 100% to 400% over the course of 30 seconds. Survivors will want to stop this generator from regressing as soon as possible. So overall, what this perk's going to do a few things for you, but most importantly, what it's going to do is that if you kick a gen and no survivor comes back to that generator is going to lose all of its progress in about a little over a minute. Later on, there'll be different perks that synergize with Overcharge pretty well, but just by itself, I think it's probably the best perk in the game now for actually kicking a generator. Up next, we have Monitor and Abuse. While in a chase, your terror radius is increased by 8 meters. Otherwise, your terror radius is decreased by 8 meters, and your field of view is increased by 10 degrees. Monitor and Abuse is a very good perk on a lot of different killers because it's going to make it to where the survivors don't have as much time to react to you, which is going to open up a lot of windows for you to get free hits. Then after you're in a chase, your terror radius is going to get even bigger, which is going to make other survivors on generators panic a little bit, play a little bit more safer. And on top of both of those effects, your field of view is also increased by 10 degrees, which is good because maybe when you're a newer player, you get spun, or you're like me and you use a controller and you get spun just as often. His third perk and his weakest perk is Overwhelming Presence. Survivors within your terror radius suffer from inefficiency. Affected survivors' item consumption rates are increased by 100%. Very memey perk. There's other options later on that'll be way better for dealing with items, but as long as you don't have those perks, I think Overwhelming Presence at least does have a little bit of extra value. Coming in at number 6, we have Nurse. Nurse has 2 really strong perks and 1 decent perk. Her first perk is a Nurse's Calling. The auras of survivors who are healing or being healed are revealed to you when they were within a 28-meter range. It was a pretty decent range, and this perk is going to work really well on pretty much any killer that can hide their terror radius, or any perks that hide your terror radius, because it's going to give you a lot of ability to sneak up on survivors when they're very vulnerable and get a hit. It's easily one of the best information perks in the entire game. Next up we have Strider, and Strider up until now has not really been that strong. You almost only ever saw it on Spirit because it excelled her pretty savagely, but now that Iron Will's been nerfed, Strider actually has some potential to help you find survivors that are hiding or being stealthy, or help you out in a chase. Her third perk and strongest in my opinion, because it's getting a pretty significant buff in the next update, is Thanatophobia. For each injured survivor, dying, or hooked survivor, all survivors receive a penalty of 5% to a maximum of 20%, which will be up to 22% to repair, sabotage, and totem cleansing speeds. And on top of that, they're making generators take 10 seconds longer, so this perk is getting a lot of extra juice, and it's really good if you just don't know what else to use or you're keeping survivors injured a lot. It's gonna slow the game down for you basically passively. Up next we have Deathslinger, and I don't think everyone will agree with me on this one, but his first perk is Hex Retribution. Any survivor interacting with a Dull Totem or a Hex Totem will suffer from the Oblivious status effect for 45 seconds. If any Hex Totem is removed, including this one, the auras of all survivors are revealed for 15 seconds. Now this perk alone is pretty decent, but there are some really strong synergies that you can use this perk with to get a lot of value out of it, so keep that in mind. His second perk is Gearhead. After a survivor loses a health state, Gearhead activates. While Gearhead is active, each time a survivor completes a great skill check while repairing, their aura is revealed to you for 10 seconds. It's an okay information perk to defend generators, especially since some barbecue and chili isn't as valuable as it used to be. Nothing too crazy, but it gives you a little bit of value. His strongest perk by far is Dead Man Switch. When you hook a survivor, Dead Man Switch activates for the next 45 seconds. While activated, any survivor that stops repairing a generator before it is fully repaired causes the entity to block the generator until Dead Man Switch effect ends. Affected generators are highlighted by a white aura. This perk is going to do a lot for you. Not only is it going to block generators pretty significantly, but it's going to give you information as well. If you see that a survivor gets off a generator after getting a hook, you know that the survivor who's coming from the unhook is most likely coming from that direction, and you can cut them off, just throwing everything out of whack for the survivors and getting a lot of passive slowdown as well throughout the match. This is one of the few perks left in the game that I feel like really reward the killer for playing in a way that takes skill. Up next, we have Michael Myers. Now, Michael Myers' abilities are not so gen defense oriented, they're more chase oriented. His first perk is Play with Your Food. You become obsessed with one survivor. Every time you chase your obsession and then let them escape, you receive a token up to a maximum of 3 tokens. Each token increases your movement speed by 5%. Performing a basic or special attack spends 1 token. This is a very niche perk, so you're not going to just be throwing this on for no reason. You need to have a very specific reason to run Play with Your Food. I think Ghostface probably gets more value out of it than any other killer in the game. The real reason you want to level up Myers is for Save the Best for Last. This perk is going to synergize pretty well with Play with Your Food as well. Earn a token for each successful basic attack that is not dealt to the obsession. Each token grants a stackable 5% decreased successful basic cooldown. You can earn up to 8 tokens. hitting your obsession with a basic attack will cause you to lose 2 tokens. So what this perk is going to do is every time you hit a survivor, you're going to recover much faster and they're going to get way less distance on you. With all of the endurance effects coming to the game, you're going to probably be needing to hit survivors way more often, and save the best for last is going to come in clutch for that. This could really be the next big meta perk in the game. It gives you a lot of utility outside of chases too. You can completely shut down safe unhooks or trades. This is going to be one of those perks I think that once you use it, it's going to be hard to stop using it. And it works best on killers that can use their M2 to get hits so that they can save their stacks and use their M2 on the obsession to increase the maximum value out of it. You're probably going to see this used with Demogorgon more than any other killer in the game, but it also works well with Deathslinger. So if you have Deathslinger leveled up, throw it on Deathslinger and you should see some good value. His last perk, and I would say by far his weakest perk, is Dying Light. This perk, you only get value out of it using it on a killer that can break the survivor so that they can't heal at all, which basically means Plague and Legion with a button. Your obsession gains a 33% action speed bonus to unhooking and healing other survivors, so that's a debuff to you. Each time you hook a survivor other than the obsession, if the obsession is alive, you gain a token. If the obsession is alive, all survivors who are not the obsession get a 3% penalty to repair, healing, and sabotage speeds for each token. So it does pair well a little bit with Anitrophobia or Hex Pentimento, but ultimately, like I said, don't use this on killers that don't break survivors like Plague and Legion. The last killer of the first row is Trapper, starting with Agitation, which increases your movement speed while transporting bodies by 18%. While transporting a body, your terror radius is increased by 12 meters, and that pairs really well with Starstruck so that you can get a bigger radius when you pick a survivor up and more survivors will become exposed. But just the increased movement speed is going to give you an insane amount of value. You can really choose what hook you want to put survivors on. You can really make sure that you always land your Scourge hooks if you're using a Scourge hook perk as well. I think Agitation, in my opinion, is probably the most underrated killer perk in the entire game. His next perk is Brutal Strength. Destroy dropped pallets, breakable walls, and generators 20% faster. This is going to make you way more lethal in a chase, especially with the increase in base breaking speed coming in the next update. So you're going to get a lot of value out of Brutal Strength, and it's an amazing quality of life perk, and when you play with it for long enough, it kind of becomes addicting and you don't want to stop. So can't recommend Brutal Strength enough. His last perk is Unnerving Presence. Your presence alone steals blah blah blah. Survivors within your terror radius have a 10% greater chance of triggering a skill check when repairing or healing. Triggered skill check success zones are reduced by 60%, which is kinda pathetic. Using this with the new Colorophobia though could actually have a little bit of a decent meme combo. Overall though, I wouldn't say that this is a good perk, and you should only really use it when you're being dumb. Starting the next row, we have Clown. Now, Clown used to have 2 really strong perks, but in my opinion, he only really has 1 really strong perk now, which is Bamboozle. Your vault speed is increased by 15%, and performing a vault action calls upon the entity to block that vault location for 16 seconds. Only 1 vault location may be blocked in this way at any time. The vault location is blocked only for survivors. This does not affect pallets. So this is one of the strongest chase perks in the game. It's exceptionally good on Bubba and Hillbilly. Unlike crowd control, it's not a hex, so you could use it throughout the entire match. Good survivors do know how to use this perk against you, so you have to be careful when you decide to use it. But overall, like I said, it's one of the best chasing perks in the game. Up next, we have Colorophobia. Your presence alone instills great fear. Survivors within your terror radius have a 50% penalty to healing progress speed. In addition to that, they're adding some of the most difficult skill checks in the game to this perk so that it makes it basically impossible for survivors to heal while within your terror radius. So this perk opens up a few meme builds that you could come up with on different killers. Doctor would probably be the most obvious of those, and you can just shut down healing as much as possible. His last perk is Pop Goes the Weasel. Pop Goes the Weasel gives killers a controlled way to remove significant progress from a generator of their choosing. In the next update, kicking a generator will remove 2.5% of progress off of a gen when you kick it. On top of that, Pop Goes the Weasel will now remove 20% of the generator's current, not total progress. basically making it to where you get about 10% regression on a generator unless it's about 99% done, in which case you'll get closer to 20%. Overall, I don't think Pop Goes the Weasel is really worth using anymore, especially with perks like Pain Resonance and Overcharge and Call of Brine probably giving you more value throughout the match with much more control on you. That said, it does combo a little bit with Overcharge and Call of Brine, so you could still potentially use it if you have a specific build going on where you think it's worth it. Up next, we have Legion, and Legion's strongest perk, and the reason that they're this high on the list, is Discordance. Any generator within the range of 128 meters, which is basically an entire map, that is being repaired by 2 or more survivors is marked by a yellow aura. When the generator is first highlighted, Discordance triggers a loud noise notification on the generator. After the gen is no longer within range or is no longer being repaired by 2 or more survivors, the aura remains for another 4 seconds. So this is literally one of the best information perks in the game to defend generators with. You don't have to do anything special for this perk, it just procs if 2 or more survivors are on a gen, which is really important because when 2 survivors are on a generator, they can finish it incredibly fast. Next up, we have Iron Maiden. You open lockers 50% faster. Survivors who exit lockers suffer from the exposed status effect for 30 seconds and scream, revealing their location for 4 seconds. Iron Maiden is a perk that works really well on Huntress and Trickster because it allows you to reload really fast, but it also works on killers that make survivors want to hide in lockers. Like some survivors will hide in lockers to get away from Doctor's static blast, so there's a little bit of synergy there as well. Overall, it's a really good perk and it shuts down lockers entirely. Her last perk is Mad Grit. While carrying a survivor, you suffer no cooldown for missed basic attacks, and successfully hitting another survivor with a basic attack will pause the carried survivor's wiggle timer for 4 seconds. As I said before with Starstruck shuts down body blocking completely. It makes it literally impossible for the survivors basically to do it. What Mad Grit does is it punishes survivors for body blocking, so they will still try, but they won't realize that you have Mad Grit, and boom, you get free hits. So there's a little bit of a difference there, and it's worth noting. Overall though, I don't know how useful Mad Grit's going to be. With all the increased endurance effects in the game though, there's a chance you'll be getting a lot more value out of Mad Grit just by running it by itself. Usually you only see it in like complete basement builds though. Up next we have Onryo or Sadako. Her first perk, and really the reason you're doing this, would be Call of Brine. After damaging a generator, this perk becomes active for 60 seconds. The generator regresses at 200% of the normal regression speed, and you can see its aura in yellow. Each time a survivor completes a good skill check on a generator affected by this perk, you receive a loud noise notification. So this perk is really good by itself, especially because you have so many fewer other options now when it comes to regressing generators. It pairs really well with Overcharge because not only does it make Overcharge better default, but it gives you a notification if somebody starts working on the gen again, so you know whether or not you should go back to it. I think it's a bit of an underrated perk, but it's also not the greatest perk known to man, so keep that in mind when running it. Next up, you have Scourge Hook Floods of Rage. When a survivor is unhooked from a Scourge Hook, all other survivors have their auras revealed for 7 seconds. This perk's going to give you a lot of information if you're able to land Scourge Hooks. It's not the greatest perk in the world, but it is pretty good for information builds, especially for characters like Huntress or Onryo herself. Her last perk is Merciless Storm. When a generator reaches 90% progress, survivors working on the generator will be faced with continuous skill checks. If they miss or stop repairing, the generator is blocked by the entity for 20 seconds. A pretty good passive perk, but you can also get legitimate value out of it by using it with someone like Doctor or mixing it with a perk like Tinkerer and squeezing just a little bit of extra time and value out of every generator. Up next, we have Leatherface, and his first perk you're going to want is Barbecue and Chili. After hooking a survivor, all other survivors' auras are revealed to you for 4 seconds when they are further than 40 meters from the survivor you're hooking. Now, unfortunately, they are getting rid of the blood point bonuses that used to go along with this perk, but besides that, it's still a pretty decent perk overall. I would say that it's close to the best information perk in the game. So it lost its incentive to go for all 4 different survivors, but it still gives you a lot of other value outside of that. His next perk is Franklin's Demise. Your basic attacks make survivors drop their items on impact. While on the ground, it takes up to 90 seconds for the item to lose all of its charges if it's not picked up. Reveal items on the ground within 32 meters with a white aura. The aura will slowly fade red until the item is empty of charges. So this works really good on medkits because medkits need a certain amount of charges to actually do their job. So if you're able to even damage a medkit a little bit, it can completely make the medkit pretty much worthless. If you load into a match and you see a lot of items you don't want to deal with, Franklin's Demise is going to be your go-to. It also works really well on characters like Hag because you can trap items after you knock them out of survivors' hands, and it works really well with Pinhead because you can knock the box out of survivors' hands and activate the chain hunt immediately. His last perk is Knockout. Survivors put into the dying state by your basic attacks are not revealed to other survivors when they are standing outside of a 16-meter range. Survivors put into the dying state by your basic attacks crawl 50% slower for 15 seconds, and their recovery speed is reduced by 25%. During this time, survivors are affected by the blindness status effect. Up next, we have Spirit, and her first perk, and personally my favorite perk in the entire game, not that it's that great, is Rancor. You become obsessed with one survivor. Each time a generator is completed, your obsession sees your aura for 3 seconds. Each time a generator is completed, all survivors' locations are revealed to you for 3 seconds. Once all the generators are completed, the obsession has the exposed status effect, and you can kill your obsession. So basically, in the end game, you can freely kill your obsession with a Mori as soon as the last generator is finished. You can pair this with things like Nemesis to change your obsession when you get stunned and No Way Out, and you can rack up 2 or 3 Moris at the end of a game, and it really is a nice comeback to a game that you otherwise probably weren't doing amazing in. Or if you're like me, you purposely leave people alive for the end game just so you can enjoy the Mori. Her next perk is Spirit Fury. After breaking 2 pallets, the next time you are stunned by a pallet, the entity will instantly break the pallet. You will still suffer from the stun effect penalty. And this perk by itself isn't incredibly strong, but if you pair it with something like Enduring that reduces your stun by like 50%, then you can basically get an instant free hit on a survivor when they drop a pallet on you. Her last perk, and probably her strongest perk, is Hex Haunted Grounds. 2 trapped Hex totems will spawn in the trial. When either of one of the 2 Hex totems is cleansed by a survivor, all survivors suffer from the exposed status effect for 60 seconds. The remaining trapped Hex totem immediately becomes a dull totem. So this is going to give you 60 seconds where you can down any survivor with a basic attack. On top of that, you can mix this with things like Hex Undying to make it to where it can activate twice, or you could pair this with Hex Retribution and basically get free downs on survivors trying to hide. It's an extremely strong perk that can literally turn games around entirely. You'll often see this perk used in competitive matches as well. Next up, we have Hillbilly, and Hillbilly's first perk is getting nerfed in the next update, which is Tinkerer. When a generator is repaired to 70% repair progress, it triggers a loud noise notification and you are granted the undetectable status effect for 16 seconds. In the next update, Tinkerer will only be able to proc once per generator, but it will give you a little bit of extra time to make it to the generator because generators take an extra 10 seconds each to be completed. This is a pretty significant nerf to the perk, but I think that in the right hands you'll still be able to get value out of it. Then we have Lightborn. You are immune to blindness caused by flashlights, firecrackers, flashbangs, and blast mines. Survivors that attempt blinding you have their aura revealed for 10 seconds, so this perk just completely shuts down flashlights. If you load into a lobby and you see 4 survivors with flashlights, you can put on Lightborn and completely ruin their time. Even though it's not the greatest perk in the world, it annoys survivors enough that there's a Twitter account dedicated just to nerfing this perk. His last perk, and I believe to be his best perk, is Enduring. You are resilient to pain. You reduce the duration of pallet stuns by 50%, has no effect while carrying a survivor. So this is going to pair well perfectly with Spirit Fury that we just mentioned, but also this perk by itself is incredibly strong. The fact that you can break pallets now significantly faster by base default means that Enduring is going to allow you to catch back up to survivors that pallet stun you incredibly fast if they try to leave the pallet when they stun you, which they usually do. Again, this is up there with Bamboozle and Save the Best for Last for being one of the best chasing perks in the game to get downs faster. Next up, we have this ugly mug here, and his first and most important perk is Hex Undying. While Hex Undying is active, survivors within 4 meters of any dull totem have their aura revealed. When another Hex totem is cleansed, that totem's Hex transfers to the Hex Undying totem, deactivating Hex Undying. Any tokens that transferred Hex had are transferred as well. So first of all, this perk is pretty good just by itself as an information perk. You're going to see survivors moving around usually at the start of the game, maybe hovering around dull totems. But like I said before, this pairs extremely well with Hex Haunted Grounds or other just Hex totems like Devour Hope that we'll see a little bit later. Hex Ruin has unfortunately been nerfed, so I don't really think that that combo has a real purpose anymore, but there's still incredible value in this perk by itself. Then we have Hex Blood Favor. Injuring a survivor will call upon the entity to block pallets from being pulled down within a 32-meter radius of the survivor's location for 15 seconds. The Hex effect persists as long as the related Hex totem is standing. So this one is a bit of a memey one because it needs to be used on certain killers to get value. Huntress is a good example. You hit them with a hatchet and it'll block all the generators within a 32-meter radius so they can't immediately just throw a pallet down on you. You basically get a free down. Unfortunately, it is a Hex totem though, so it probably won't last that long. Regardless, it's still a good perk. Then we have Dragon's Grip. After damaging a generator for the next 30 seconds, the first survivor that interacts with it will scream, revealing their location for 4 seconds and becoming afflicted with the exposed status effect for a full minute. Dragon's Grip does have a cooldown though of 1 minute and 20 seconds, which is kinda rough. So here's the thing. This perk before probably wasn't that good. You could have used it with Call of Brine, but even then I'd say the survivors would probably just ignore it. But now with Overcharge, I think they're going to be a little bit more inclined to stop that gen. So what this is going to do is it'll probably give you like 1 free down maybe, but then after that, I think what's going to happen is the survivors will just let the gen die because they don't want to get exposed. However, this perk will probably not be that valuable on killers that aren't very mobile. You're going to need to play something like Wraith that can get around really quickly and switch targets on a whim in order to get the maximum value out of it. Next up, we have one of my favorite killers, Pyramid Head, and the perk that you're going to want to look for on him is Forced Penance. Survivors who take a protection hit are inflicted with the broken status effect for 80 seconds. This perk is a little bit underrated in my opinion because it's only really needed at high level when you need to get a survivor out of the match as fast as possible. In any kind of situation where you're maybe tunneling or the survivors are body blocking a lot, Forced Penance is going to shut it down. I think if you run this perk, you might be surprised by how much value you actually are able to get out of it in a match. His next perk is Trail of Torment. After damaging a generator, you become undetectable until the generator stops regressing or a survivor is injured or put into the dying state by any means. During this time, the generator's yellow aura is revealed to survivors. So again, with the fact that you're going to be kicking more generators in the new meta, you could throw this on to maybe get some surprise hits here and there. But overall, I think it's kind of a weak perk and in need of a little bit of a change. I don't really think there's any reason it should tell the survivors that you've activated Trail of Torment. Then we have Deathbound. When a survivor heals another survivor for 1 health state at least 32 meters away from the killer, the survivor performing the healing action will scream, revealing their location and activating Deathbound for the next 60 seconds. During that time, the survivor will suffer from the Oblivious status effect when further than 8 meters away from the healed survivor. Overall, again, it's kind of a decent perk, but I don't think it's worth running. The only reason Pyramid Head is at this point on the list is because of how much faith I have in Forced Penance being a great perk. Last up on row number 2, we have Ghostface, and Ghostface's best perk in my opinion is I'm All Ears. Unlocks the potential in one's auras reading blah, blah, blah. Any survivor performing a rushed action within 48 meters from your location will have their aura revealed for 6 seconds. I'm All Ears can only be triggered once every 40 seconds. So what's so good about this perk, especially if you play stealth killers, is that you're able to mind game survivors incredibly well at loops where they can't see you. Beyond that, it synergizes incredibly well with Pyramid Head, who you've just leveled up. You can now see survivors and hit them perfectly with your M2 through walls like you have wall hacks. There's a real debate that I'm All Ears is the best chasing perk in the game. His next perk is Furtive Chase. You become obsessed with one survivor. You lurk in the shadows, eliminating blah blah blah. When your obsession is hooked, Furtive Chase receives a token up to a maximum of 4 tokens. Each token decreases your terror radius by 4 meters while in a chase. When a survivor rescues the obsession from the hook, the rescuer becomes the obsession. This is not a very good perk, it's very memey and it needs to be used on a very specific build with a very specific killer, and then you can get some value out of it. But other than that, it's not really worth it. In almost every case, I can't recommend using this perk. Lastly, we have Thrilling Tremors. After picking up a survivor, all generators not being repaired by survivors are blocked by the entity and cannot be repaired for the next 16 seconds. Affected generators are highlighted by a white aura. Thrilling Tremors can only be triggered once every 60 seconds. I personally don't think that this should really have a cooldown, but it is a good information perk if you're trying to figure out what gens are actually being done by survivors. They can work around it a little bit, but only at the cost of sacrificing 16 seconds of repair time, which really isn't that bad. So if you're not using barbecue and chili anymore for information where you can get around it by hiding behind the gen, Thrilling Tremors is going to really give you probably better information on where to go. Starting row number 3, we have the Hag, and her first and best perk by far is Hex Devour Hope. When a survivor is rescued from a hook at least 24 meters away from you, Devour Hope receives a token. 2 tokens gain a 5% haste status effect for 10 seconds after hooking a survivor for a duration of 10 seconds. 3 tokens survivors suffer from the exposed status effect, which is already enormous, and 5 tokens grants the ability to kill survivors by your own hand, allowing you to immediately mori any survivor you put into the dying state. I truly believe this is the strongest hex perk in the game now at this point. Now, prior to this update, Hag would have been way higher on the list, but unfortunately her second perk, Hex Ruin, has been severely nerfed, and instead of regressing generators at 200% speed, it now only regresses generators at 100% speed, which is incredibly slow, almost completely worthless. Outside of a literal brand new player playing the game, I don't think I could recommend using Hex Ruin in any possible situation. Her third perk is Hex the Third Seal, a hex that hinders one's aura reading ability. Hitting a survivor with a basic or a special attack while the hex totem is active applies the blindness status effect. The effect applies to the last 4 survivors hit. This really doesn't do too much for you. There are a few meme builds I've seen pop up that you can use Third Seal on, but ultimately it's not really worth it. The reason you are prestiging Hag is for Devour Hope, and don't let anybody try to tell you otherwise. Up next, we have Boop the Snoot Pig, and her best perk is Make Your Choice. When a survivor rescues another from a hook at least 32 meters away from you, Make Your Choice causes the survivor to scream and applies the exposed status effect to them for 60 seconds. This perk can be used with a lot of different killers and a lot of different other perks that synergize really well with it, like Devour Hope, that can really just keep the momentum going and keeping the pressure going once you get your first down. I wouldn't say this perk is meta, but it's strong and it's worth using from time to time. Then we have Surveillance. Any regressing generator will be highlighted by a white aura. If the regression is interrupted on a generator, it will be highlighted by a yellow aura for 16 seconds. Noises created by generator repairs are audible at an additional 8 meters. So Surveillance has a lot of value in it. Again, because of Barbecue's nerf, it has even more value when it comes to protecting generators. Up next, we have Hangman's Trick. Gain a notification when a survivor begins sabotaging a hook. While carrying a survivor, see the aura of any survivor within 6 meters of a hook. Now, Hangman's Trick is currently the most underused perk in the entire game on the killer side. Nobody runs this perk. Now that barbecue and chili isn't as strong as it was, again, there's some value. You could try it out and see what kind of results you have. Ultimately though, until something significant changes, I don't think Hangman's Trick is really gonna have that much of a chance. I really think what the devs could look into is making it to where when you're using Hangman's Trick, your scorch hooks can't be sabotaged. I think that might be enough. Next up, we have Fake Freddy Krueger. And Fake Freddy Krueger is all about the endgame. His first perk is Blood Warden. As soon as an exit gate is opened, Blood Warden is activated. The auras of any survivors located within exit areas are revealed to you. Once per match, hooking a survivor while Blood Warden is active calls upon the entity to block both exits for all survivors for 60 seconds. Now, Blood Warden is kind of a hard perk because you really have to rely on the survivors kind of messing up for this to work. And there's also just better endgame perks in general, like No Ed and No Way Out. But there are definitely some DBD players who swear by Blood Warden and use it basically every match. In my opinion, it's best used by itself and not any other endgame perks, as if you pair it with other endgame perks, I think survivors are more likely to think that you probably have it. This is a perk where you really want to be able to catch survivors off guard. His second perk is Remember Me. You become obsessed with one survivor. Each time your obsession loses a health state, you increase the opening time of the exit gates by 4 seconds up to a maximum of 16 additional seconds. The obsession is not affected by Remember Me. I really wish that last part wasn't there, because if the obsession just opens the exit gate, then it kind of just did nothing for you. This is a perk that you probably want to mix with the other endgame perks like No Ed, like No Way Out, to really get the actual value out of it. It's just going to add that little bit of extra desperation for the survivors to get out. Again, I wouldn't really use it with Blood Warden, because once they open the exit gate, they're going to know you're up to no good and they're going to leave. His last perk is Fired Up. For each generator completed, gain a 4% stackable buff that grants a speed bonus to picking up, dropping, vaulting, damaging generators, and breaking pallets and breakable walls for the remainder of the trial. Now, Fire Up's problem has always been that there are other perks that basically do everything Fire Up does, but better. Brutal Strength, Bamboozle, these things just are better the entire match from start to finish. But with the changes coming to some of the base kit of the game and how fast the killer does things, Fire Up is going to be more valuable, especially if you combine it with perks like Brutal Strength and Bamboozle. It'll be a really fast-paced, high chase-oriented match, and I think it could be pretty fun, and I'm looking forward to trying it out myself. Up next, we have goofy-looking Nemesis, and his first perk is Lethal Pursuer. At the start of the trial, the auras of all survivors are revealed to you for 9 seconds. In addition to this, in the next update, Lethal Pursuer will now extend the duration of all of your other aura reading abilities by 2 seconds, so you can pair this with other perks like I'm All Ears or even add-ons, and it'll give you an extra 2 seconds on those aura readings. Lethal Pursuer can be a complete game changer from time to time. If you're a dirty killer like me who sees an AFK player at the beginning of the game, and you'd be surprised how often players are AFK at the beginning of a match, you can get a lot of free hook stays. Nemesis' second perk, Eruption, is also getting changed in the next update. After kicking a generator, its aura is highlighted to you in yellow. Whenever a survivor enters the dying state, every affected generator explodes, losing 10% worth of the progress and continuing to regress. Any survivors repairing a generator when it explodes will scream and suffer from the incapacitated status effect for 25 seconds, up from 16 seconds. So a pretty decent buff. We'll have to see how much value you still can actually get out of this perk. It's really hard to get this to proc usually, so this one's kind of up in the air. I still don't know how much value you're going to get out of it unless you're playing someone like Nurse. His last perk is Hysteria. Whenever a healthy survivor becomes injured by any means, all injured survivors suffer from the Oblivious status effect for 30 seconds. Hysteria can only trigger once every 30 seconds. Outside of basically Legion, I don't really feel like this is worth it. It has its purpose, but again, it's another very memey perk, so I wouldn't rely on getting value out of it. Up next, we have the Dredge, the newest killer in the game, who unfortunately I believe has some of the weaker perks that they've created for a newer killer in quite a while. His first perk is Septic Touch. Whenever a survivor performs the healing action within your terror radius, that survivor suffers from the blindness and exhausted status effect for 10 seconds, which is really low. I think it's a pretty weak perk, and once a survivor gets affected by it, they're going to realize you have it, and then they're not going to get affected by it again. So overall, just not worth using. Then we have Darkness Revealed. In my opinion, this is his best perk. When you search a locker, the auras of all survivors within 8 meters of any lockers are revealed to you for 5 seconds, and the perk only has a 30-second cooldown. This is going to work really well with Huntress and Trickster because you're already opening lockers a lot, but it's also going to be really helpful if you're using something like Overcharge and you kick a generator and just want to make sure there's no survivors hiding in a bush nearby. Open the locker, do a quick 360, make sure, and then you can leave more freely. His last perk is Dissolution. 3 seconds after injuring a survivor by any means, Dissolution activates for 20 additional seconds, so think of it as a 23-second perk. While Dissolution is active, if a survivor fast vaults over a pallet inside of your terror radius, the entity will break the pallet at the end of the vault and Dissolution deactivates. Now, the problem with Dissolution is it tells the survivor that you have it the second they get hit, so they know not to vault a pallet, which means that you have to somehow force them to vault a pallet even though they know it's going to break the pallet anyway. And that's what really makes this perk kind of a bummer, is you don't even get that first surprise off like you would with like Septic Touch. Dissolution doesn't even have that. It literally warns the survivor that you have it, and it takes quite a bit of effort and desperation to get them to do it. It's just really not worth it. I've seen a Legion build with it, a Deathslinger build with it. Overall though, very weak perk, and maybe there's some 10,000 IQ purpose for it that hasn't been discovered yet. I just haven't found it myself. Up next we have Oni, and my favorite perk on Oni is Nemesis. A survivor who blinds you or stuns you using a pallet or locker becomes your obsession. Anytime a new survivor becomes the obsession, they are afflicted by the Oblivious status effect for 60 seconds, and their aura is shown to you for 4 seconds. Now, you can use this in a lot of different ways. You can use this with Pyramid Head and get stunned at a pallet and then use the aura to hit them with an M2, or you can pair this with Rancor at the end game and get a lot of extra kills because you're making new people your obsession quite easily, and then down drowning them and mooring them. So that's why Nemesis is my favorite perk from Oni. His second perk is Zanshin Tactics. The auras of all pallets, breakable walls, and vault locations are revealed to you within a 32-meter range. In my opinion, this is the worst perk in the entire game. It does absolutely nothing for you, with maybe the smallest exception of someone like Doctor, who can use it to time his shocks better, but beyond that, I really just don't see any value at all in this perk. His last perk is Blood Echo. When hooking a survivor, all other injured survivors suffer from the hemorrhage and exhaustion status effect for 45 seconds. Blood Echo has a cooldown of 60 seconds. This perk has only really ever been used with Legion and Plague to counter Dead Hard, because Dead Hard is pretty much the one main counterplay to those killers. Now that I see less survivors running Dead Hard, Blood Echo is going to become even more useless than I think it already has been in the past. One of the unfortunate aspects of Blood Echo is it's hard to tell how much value you actually get out of it in a match. You kind of have to make a mental note to check at the end game to see what perks the survivors were using to really understand how much value it even gave you. Up next we have Wraith, and I believe Wraith is probably one of the best killers in the game for new players to learn, but his perks leave a lot to be desired. Now, starting with Shadowborn, your field of view is increased by 15 degrees wider than normal. A lot of killer mains are going to be annoyed that I didn't put Wraith higher on the list, simply because they don't ever play the game without Shadowborn. They literally swear by it like it's an absolute necessity to play the game. And although I agree that it's a very nice quality of life perk to have in the game, it's just hard to justify using it when it's more of just a quality of life thing than it really is a perk. But if you just can't absolutely stand the super close field of view in this game, Shadowborn is the only thing you can really do to fix it. Up next we have Bloodhound. Fresh blood marks are considerably more discernible than normal and can be tracked for 4 seconds longer than normal. And this perk is really good for new players because it really makes the blood stand out. Like, it really shines and does its job well in that regard. Experienced players usually don't need to bother with Bloodhound and can easily get around it, especially with the Iron Will nerf coming to the game, but I still think Bloodhound does have a place for newer players, just like his third perk, which is Predator. Scratch marks left by survivors will spawn considerably close together. It just makes it easier to track survivors like Bloodhound. With Lightweight getting buffed in this update, scratch marks could potentially be a little bit more annoying to deal with, so maybe you could get extra value out of Predator because of that, but overall it's a pretty weak perk and something I would only recommend to the absolute newest players who play the game. Up next we have the Twins, who also has pretty weak perks overall. Her first perk is Coup de Grace. Each time a generator is completed, Coup de Grace grows in power. Gain a token. Consume 1 token to increase the distance of your next lunge by 80%. A very small reward for such a humongous sacrifice. I've seen players put together pretty funny meme builds with this perk, but overall I really wouldn't ever recommend using this. Then you have Hoarder. Survivors reveal their location when they interact with a chest or when they pick up an item within 64 meters of your location. The trial begins with up to 2 additional chests in the environment. Hoarder is a very memey perk again. It can be used with Franklin's Demise to get a little bit of extra value out of it. The highest level you play you'll see this perk used with is Pinhead, so that when players pick up the limit configuration, you can see them before they start solving it. And you can just chase the box essentially the entire game and try to keep Chain Hunt from never ending. Outside of that, it's a pretty terrible perk and I really wouldn't use it. Then we have Oppression, which, like Grim Embrace, is just a very weak gen defense perk. When you damage a generator, up to 3 other random generators also begin regressing. If the affected generators are being repaired, any survivors repairing them receive a difficult skill check. If this perk synergized with like Overcharge or Call of Brine to where they regressed heavier, then it might be worth it, but as it stands right now with an 80-second cooldown, it's absolute gutter trash and I just wouldn't use it. If someone out there swears by it and uses it maybe with surveillance or something, I could kind of see where they're coming from, but in my experience, I feel like I've never gotten value out of this perk. Up next, we have the killer who I believe has the absolute worst perks in the entire game, Huntress. Her first perk is Hex Huntress Lullaby. Your hunt, blah 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 blah. Survivors receive a 6% regression penalty when missing a skill check while healing or repairing. Each time a survivor is hooked, Huntress Lullaby grows in power. It affects healing and repairing skill check warnings. 1 to 4 tokens time between skill check warning sounds and skill checks become shorter, and 5 tokens you get no skill check warning at all. Unfortunately, this is a hex totem, and it has the same exact value as Devour Hope, a perk that literally lets you kill survivors at 5 tokens and insta-down survivors at 3 tokens. Huntress Lullaby is in massive need of some kind of buff, or it just needs to not be a hex perk anymore. It's really awful. Then you have Beast of Prey, grants the undetectable status effect after gaining Bloodlust tier 1. The status effect is removed once you lose Bloodlust. Gain 50% more blood points for actions in the Hunter category, which is very minimal. It's just not that good of a perk. You can maybe use it if you're absolutely terrible at chasing survivors and you just want that little bit of extra value, but I wouldn't use this under any circumstances. Her last perk is Territorial Imperative. Survivors' auras are revealed to you for 3 seconds when they enter the basement and you are further than 32 meters away from the basement entrance. Territorial Imperative can only be triggered once every 20 seconds. The only value I can really see you getting out of this perk is using it with Dredge to teleport immediately to the locker, or using it with Bubba and then rushing the basement as soon as a survivor goes down and trying to down them in the basement to get an easy basement hook, but then you're completely relying on the survivors going into the basement for some reason, which they do on occasion, but usually they don't. Now you might be asking yourself, who can possibly have worse perks than Huntress if she has the worst perks in the game? And well, that would be Demogorgon, because Demogorgon no longer has any teachables at all, so there's literally no value in prestiging him at all. But hey, it's still cool. Maybe you want the bloody outfit, am I right? That's the total list. I hope you found this helpful and it gave you a good roadmap on where to start. I know most killer mains probably will disagree on the strength of different perks in their current state, but I'm confident my list won't let you down. If you'd like to see a similar list for Survivor, let me know. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a good one.